Inner Voice, a heartfelt chat with Dr. Foojan.
Welcome to the Inner Voice, a heartfelt chat podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Foojan Zeine, psychotherapist, and I'm an author and the creator of the Awareness Integration Theory. So thrilled to have you join me today. But I promise you, it's an amazing, amazing conversation and a discussion about grief, something that we've all have either gone through or will go through life. So in this episode, I chat with Meghan Riordan Jarvis. She's a licensed social worker. She's a podcast host. She's a TEDx speaker and a trauma-trained psychotherapist. And she specializes in grief and loss. With 20 years of experience, she speaks on the importance of understanding grief and supporting grievers. Meghan hosts the popular blog and podcast of Grief is My Side Hustle, and offers a free writing workshop, Grief Mates, and she's the founder of the Grief Mentor Method, 6 core concepts to creating a personalized grief process, and is the author of End of Hour, a memoir of trauma and loss and healing. You can find her at Meghan Riordan Jarvis. And today, actually, we're going to talk about her latest book, which is about, has anybody told me, and the questions that about grief. We shared a conversation about our experiences of grief, some of our clients' grief, and what it looks like, how our brain and heart kind of tries to find peace with it in the process that we go through grief. And it's so important to be able to take care of ourselves. Sometimes we look at it as if it's a problem to solve, but it's really a process to go through. I really enjoyed our conversation. I hope that you do also. Now be sure to subscribe on this podcast, my YouTube channel, and connect with me through my website, foojanzeine.com. Go check out the app, Foojan app, and we also have a AI chatbot in it called Mira, and you can ask any question that you like about your relationships, and Mira answers you from the awareness integration perspective. So download the app from Apple Store or Google Play and enjoy 31 areas of your life of looking at them and reflecting and building skills and all of that. We found between 60 to 70% improvement on people who've worked with the app. So I hope that you also enjoy it and improve your life in any area that you need to. Connect with me on my social media platforms and share your thoughts with me. I love to hear from you. And without further ado, here's Meghan Riordan Jarvis.
Listen up if you want to promote your personal growth and self-awareness. I found the Foojan app last month and I have been absolutely loving it. I personally have never learned guided meditation, but thanks to this app, I now have learned incredible tools for my own stress relief and emotional self-awareness. Not to mention, there are self-evaluation tools and professional coaching available to utilize however your journey to self-discovery takes you. Join Foojan today and redefine your life one step at a time.
Do you wish to wake up one day and hit the Life Reset button? Life Reset, the awareness integration path to create the life you want by Dr. Foojan Zeine, helps you navigate crucial life areas, heal the past traumas, and cultivate fulfilling relationships and careers. Life Reset is your guide to a profound journey to reshape your life. Grab your copy on Amazon or Audible now and embark on a path to a more joyous and fulfilled life.
Well, hello, Meghan Riordan Jarvis. It is so nice to have you.
Thank you so much. I'm really delighted to be here.
So thank you for writing about grief. I know grief, it's so different for everyone. And I think that people have an idea that it should be similar. We look at each other and you're like, why is she or he still grieving? And then the other side is if someone grieves internally and not externally, then people say like, how come they're grieving this way? Or even, siblings grieve differently and each one of them might judge each other in a particular way. It's such a personal way of handling, and it's something that we all go through, whether we're grieving for a loss of someone or a loss of phase of life.
Yeah.
One phase of life. There's so much more to this experience, and I can't just call it a emotion, because it's such a complex concept, that it has a thought process with it. It has emotions, it has the feelings. It really relates to so many angles of loss, that it's beautiful to have your book. Can anyone tell me the essential questions about grief and loss? What got you to want to write about this?
I have been a therapist, a trauma therapist, specializing in grief and loss. So most of the clients that come to see me are people who are really struggling. And in trauma work, there used to be this sort of description of like big T trauma, meaning a terrible event that you were a part of. You were mugged, you were in a hurricane, and sort of little T trauma. We don't really call them big T and little T anymore. It's more like a single event or something that is more like a developmental experience of trauma. And I think about grief as sort of the same, like big G and little g grief, that there's a big G, which is the kind of thing like losing someone you love, getting divorced, a health crisis, and then there's the like everyday little g about our experiences. So I define grief as the energy that's created in the body on account of loss. So I believe, even though we are sort of dismissive about it, that there are elements of grief in every single day, and they can be tiny. You go to the sub shop to get the sandwich that you want, and they're out of the ingredients. No one's going to write a book about that, but that is an experience of, a loss of an expectation. And you may go to the sub shop and want that sandwich and it's not there, and your mother died 2 weeks ago. So people are carrying those things around. And what I think, the reason I wrote this book is that, having spent 20 years with clients, mostly talking about big G and talking about the kind of grief that disrupts your everyday experience, I really felt, when I experienced my own profound loss with my mother, like frustrated and angry. My mother died suddenly when I was on vacation with her, and I immediately began to really feel ill. And it eventually developed into PTSD for me, and I had to get treatment for it. But it was so disruptive to my experience. And yet, if you looked at me, you would have thought, there goes Meghan, walking down the street. And I thought, when I came out of treatment, I really did have this like frustration and anger that we don't have a core educational understanding about what grievers typically experience. Everything is personal. So to what degree you're going to experience this, that we sort of have to rely on a griever to tell us about your experience. But understanding that it is really common to have brain fog, so that like you are deeply confused. And that can come and go for years for people. Or that you have memory loss. That can be so scary, particularly for people who are, let's say above the age of 60. Acute memory loss at the loss of, let's say, a partner. You can end up in a doctor's office being evaluated for, your health in general, right? And then, sorry, it's my dog in the background. And then also, there are things like not being able to eat and not being able to sleep, which then contribute to your general functioning. And what I've really discovered with grievers is that we sort of say like, oh yeah, I didn't eat and I didn't sleep, but we don't support that as part of the health problem that can sort of be generated from both the big and the little of a grief, the big G and the little g. And so what I really wanted in this book was everything that every griever had ever told me they struggled with. I wanted folks to know, you are not the first person to have this problem. Suddenly you're mad all the time and you don't like any of the members of your family. Yeah, that's really common. Grievers talk about that all the time. Or you really don't really have a sense of who you are anymore. Grievers talk about identity. But because we don't have a core education, sorry about the dog, even therapists themselves are not able to, or don't generally get a whole lot of training. So on account of that, what we end up having are people who are not really talking about the core truths of grief. And that's what I'm hoping this book does, is really validate people and say, hey, these things are really typical. They can go on for a while. Here are some of the interventions that we, think are good for you. All of that is what I hope is in the book, and then I hope people find useful in the book.
One of the things that it's so interesting is that sometimes people deal with grief as if it's a problem to fix versus there's nothing to fix. It's just a process to go through and honor. When you talked about amnesia, I had one client, which was the most interesting, where she had come out of a car, and her husband came out of the car, and a car hit him and he died right there in front of her. The shock that was there, and these two worked together, obviously lived together, worked together. So almost 24 hours they were together and had a beautiful relationship, raised two kids. So she was in such a shock that for a while the shock was there. And then, interestingly enough, when the shock went away and she accepted that he's gone, she had a complete amnesia. She would look at the pictures and not recognize.
Yeah. Yeah.
Then she was surprised by this effect that she had, and people were getting really scared. And a lot of it was just, it's okay. It's your mind protecting you. Just be with it. And it almost took 3 months before she was able to recognize she had lost all the memories with him, any memory in her life that she had. And she could not understand what what was going on with her. She felt more scared about what was happening with her, because a part of her knew that obviously there's someone there and I should. I also experienced, I remember, Megan, when my father passed away, I suddenly gave myself the right to just be enraged with him.
Yeah.
Raged for, and I kept that rage for about 6 months before I could let him go.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the opposite happened with my mom. My mom, who I was, angry at a lot of stuff, and I was waiting to, unleash my rage, finally have the freedom to unleash my rage. And I completely forgave her for everything that had happened after, right? So it's like, it's so different with every experience that we have, and just to be with it.
I mean, you're talking about several things that I think are so critical in using personal examples and your clinical examples, which I really appreciate. The description of the difference between your mother and your father, I really that just resonates with me. I have a memoir called End of the Hour where that's what I write about. I write about my father's death from cancer really was not that disruptive to my ability to function in life, right? So grief is really personal, how it shows up for people. It's not a problem to fix. We can't fix it. But we do have these symptomatic responses, which can become problems. So you were talking about an example with your client where essentially what happened was her brain shut down all the memories because the disruption and attachment was so painful, it didn't think that she was going to survive it. So it said, okay, well, then we won't have the pain of remembering this person. And that can be super terrifying. And that's not that intensity around the memories going away isn't typical, but not being able to remember things in general totally is. Not being able to remember what day they died or what time it was or what they were wearing or whether the doctor came first or whether you got the phone call from the police. All of that is really typical. But if you don't know it's typical and you go to a regular Western doctor, they will absolutely give you a battery of psychological exams. And the other thing to know about that is it's an adaptive response, right? When you were talking about being angry at your dad, anger is a response that is kind of like a fight response. And our instincts that keep us alive, our fight, flight, and freeze responses, they don't really work with profound loss because there's nothing to fight against, right? We can't fix grief. We also can't really fight against loss. And there's nothing to flee. And even freezing Like, how long are you going to freeze for? They're not coming back, or the marriage isn't coming back, or the health is not going to be restored. And so those things that happen can make people feel, I mean, the word they use when they come into my office, they've often been suffering with these symptoms for about a year, and they'll say, I feel completely crazy. And so the first thing that happens is I say, listen, this is kind of normal. Let me tell you about somebody else or myself, now I have the book to say, look, there's examples in here from my clinical experience. And the first thing that happens is people like get little tears in their eyes because there's such relief. The pain is still there. The grief still needs to be processed, but there's relief in that they are not failing. That actually what's happened is our culture has failed at really being able to tell the truth and embrace this thing that happens to everybody. I mean, it's a really stunning truth, particularly about Western culture, is that we would rather you go to your therapy 1 hour a week, even though that therapist may not be trained to treat you in grief. We'd rather you go there, keep it quiet, and come back and kind of act like you used to be. Then make room in our lives to say, oh my God, of course, Megan's not coming into work today. Her mother died a few weeks ago and she's not sleeping very well, and that's normal. But we haven't quite cracked that normalcy code yet.
There's a lot of cultures that grieve together, and
Yeah.
the grieving together, even 40 days, 30 days, 40 days togetherness and grieving and letting it out and all of that. And obviously this doesn't happen here in the United States. The grieving is, you have 3 days and then get over it.
Yeah. Yes. And there are so many ways in which that's passively stated, like in people's bereavement policies at work, right? So it's not really a bereavement policy. What it is a leave policy so that you can go to a funeral over the weekend. That's really all they have. But it's not really a grieving or bereavement policy. But if all you have and all you see is 3 days, then you become to sort of internalize, well, I'm supposed to be able to do this in 3 days or 3 months without the norm, without an expert, without somebody, a person being able to say, no, that's not how this works. You might accidentally begin to criticize yourself. And we really do that in Western culture. Western culture, I'm sure if people are listening and you have a policy, go flip it open. The most I've really ever heard of is 30 days, which is pretty extraordinary. And there are some companies that give their executives that. And Johnson & Johnson gives all of its employees that, and they can use it, not even all at once. They can take it as they need it. But in general, the way in which we imply that if it's out loud, if you're experiencing it now, if you need to step away, if you need more support, if you can't come to the dinner, if you're not going to be able to go to the baby shower, that is the problem with you, rather than an acknowledgement of that's what's going on right now in your life. And you can kind of hear when you pivot. One is, oh, this is just a developmental experience that everyone has. We all have loss, big and little. Versus, oh man, Megan's not really doing it right because she's still so sad about her mom's death.
I think it's also the conversation of, are we able to be holding the same functionality or not? And I think people a lot more expect us to hold the same functionality. And I think we do also on ourselves. Many people, call or come to my office and they're like, it's all over. I can't, I'm talking to someone and I start crying, or I'm doing my work and I start crying and I can't breathe anymore. And, suddenly I'm like dysfunctional completely. And I run to the bathroom and I lock myself and I do that. And it's like, help in somehow putting it together. And one of the things I think what you're talking about, the expectation is like people grieve so differently that you're not necessarily learned to, okay, let me compartmentalize immediately. Oh, this 8 hours is at my work, so let's just not grieve at all.
Correct. And we don't really have a choice to do that because a song could come on, someone could say something, and suddenly, I'm remembering that time we went to Switzerland together and there's the grief.
Exactly. So what I usually say is like, honor it, write it down a little bit, give yourself a couple of minutes, but then make an appointment with yourself saying, I got to focus on this. Can I make an appointment with you? And I'll be back, at 5 o'clock, and then 5 o'clock, go sit down somewhere and really honor. So sometimes they'll kind of like, hearing yourself and appreciating yourself and doing that works versus like, why am I like this? I shouldn't cry. And you're fighting the grief versus taking care of yourself in that way.
That's beautiful. I love what you just said, the making an appointment with yourself, right? Like if you and I had to have a hard conversation, I might say, hey, can we do that at dinner time? We make an appointment to do it. We don't just because we have the feeling about it, say, well, we're going to eject from the rest of the day and address it right now. And so even just saying that to a griever gives them permission to have some agency around their, the emotions and the feelings that are being brought up. And I think because we don't teach people about the verb, what does it mean to grieve? People think it's just crying. It's not just crying. It's a whole host of things. It can be dancing. It can be painting. It can be talking to friends. But when we don't know, what ends up happening is we start to sort of fold in on ourselves, and grief can be really isolating. It can be really isolating in that sense. Like loneliness is that idea that I would like more connection, and so I feel by myself. Alone is fine. I'm just by myself. And if I'm choosing that, that can be completely neutral. Isolation really feels like I am cut off from other people. And it's a word that grievers use a lot. And when you make an appointment with yourself, at least you're connecting with yourself. I know that still sounds like you're alone, but it isn't. You're connecting with yourself. And if you're able to do that, like let's say you write a letter to yourself or you sit down and have a conversation with yourself, and you get some of that out, what you get a better understanding, like, oh, that's why I was so irritable at work, or that's why it's so hard to talk to my brother about this, or that's why I don't want to go to my niece's baby shower. You kind of like spend some time in the feeling. And then there's the possibility of being able to convey that a little bit better to others. And the way I do this, it's like my favorite thing. I have 3 people in my life who are very different, when I start to feel that, like, oh, I feel very separate from everyone else. This is how it will happen to me now. Like somebody will say like, oh, I'm going to my dad's 86th birthday this weekend. And I'll do this quick grief math of like, my dad only lived to 80. How come your dad's not better than my dad? Like, how come you got 6 more years? And they're still talking. And I will have to say, oh, like, hang on a second. I lost you for a second. If there's someone I'm really close with, I might even say, oh, I got distracted because my dad died at 80 and I was just like feeling my feelings for a second. I might even say it out loud because I don't want to be in that moment of feeling by myself. And I usually, if they're my people, I think they can handle it. If it's, if I was in a job interview and somebody said that and it's not appropriate to sort of connect personally in that moment, I have these 3 folks, my little triangle of trust, and I'll send them a note like, ugh, someone said they were going to their dad's 86th birthday, right? And it's my sister and 2 dear friends. And they will respond. They may not all respond at once. That's why you need 3 of them, right? Somebody might be in a meeting but they'll respond in their own ways. And so one of them usually says like, oh, are you okay? Do you need me to call you? Right? Which is like the Goldilocks element for me is like, well, that's a bit too hot. That's too much reaction for me. And then another one is usually not available because she's got a big job, but she'll check in with me, a couple hours later. Hey, how'd it go? And then the third one has kind of a wicked sense of humor. Like, should we crash the party? And, and that usually is the one that lands with me. But I like to have more than one person know, oh, I had a really hard feeling today. And to me, that's a personalized daily grief practice. And you can use that tool when, I don't know, you hear that your friend's kids are going to college and you have a son who's ill and is not going to college this year. You can use that little tool to reach out and say like, I've so many conversations about college today. I'm struggling. And then the people are going to respond like, what is college? Never heard of it. Or do you need me to call you? Or, so I really appreciate the description that you just gave because I think it's really important to show people what does it mean to grieve when it's not just taking a moment to be overwhelmed with tears.
I also have a lot of experience, and you shared that at the beginning, which is depending on who you've lost and what your relationship with that person was and what role you had with that person, that role is no longer there, and you re-identifying yourself as who you are. Like 2 mates who have been together for so long and then suddenly their mate is gone. The concept of I'm no longer a wife or a husband and I'm single person is like, huh? I have no idea, because I've lived with this role for so long. My whole identity is around that. I've had people who are grown adults, but their identity was so intertwined with their parents. And
Yeah.
they lost one parent or both parents, they were like, they felt like a child who lost their parent, not like, okay, I'm 40 years old and I lost my parent. But their identity of being a child to that parent was so dear to them that although they might be very successful, but suddenly it's like, my back is empty. I have
That's right.
no,
Where's my backstop? Yes.
you know. And you know, to someone who's a mother or a father and they lost their child, it's like they failed. You know, their whole point was that you, as a parent, you're supposed to have your child survive beyond you, you know, and then they go into this space of, I'm a failure because my child, I couldn't protect my child. So you talked about this identities that we have in our relationships, and not only that we lose that person, we completely lose those identities, and it's a struggle to find something else. You know, there's guilt about finding something else, as if like, okay, if I lose my identity here, then I've betrayed that person, because it just seems like I moved on. It's such a complex concept as we're, you know, when you go through these type of grief.
In grief work, when you're working with folks who sort of study the theories behind it, there's a lot that I don't find all that useful. You know, it's sort of like but there's one which is called continuing bonds, which is Dennis Klaas and Nickman. These folks who they see part of the task of becoming a griever. You know, it's a new role that you are playing, is pivoting some of that old role and making conscious decisions, right? So there may be people who say, I lost a child, but I'm still a parent, you know, or there might be somebody who says, I don't feel like I'm a parent anymore because I lost a child. What we're usually trying to ask people to think about is like, when we're doing work around continuing bonds, is what do you want it to feel like now? And when you're in the place of intense pain, all you want is to get back what you lost. But at some point, as you learn, and I mean that in a true sense of the word, is the brain and the body come to understand this is the way it is now. Then it's, how do you want your relationship as a daughter, or your relationship as a parent, or your to continue? And for some people, they really don't want it to continue. It ended the day that their mother died. And for other people, they really want to keep that relationship going. And so and I think there is some idea of it being healthy to be able to still choose to step into that role. It's not the same. No one's pretending it's the same. But folks that I work with who are able to still have conversations as though they are their mother's daughter with some idea of their mother, even if it's just a memory, they are that continuing bonds, that you're not just experiencing the loss, you're still able to tap into the love. It doesn't allow you, right? If you're a retired professional, you know, skier, you are not a skier anymore, but it doesn't mean you never go out in the woods where the wind, you know, the wind hits your face. And it doesn't mean that you never get any of the pleasure of the relationship in your body and your spirit and your mind that you had when you were that. And so we spend a lot of time sort of trying to talk with our grieving self. What feels good right now, knowing that what you need right now may not even be the same 10 months from now.
And it's interesting also that I've noticed that a lot of people who are not necessarily even spiritual or think about afterlife and all of that. So when you talk to them on a bigger theory, they don't. But when they lose someone, they really wish there was.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And then they have this concept of waiting to have signs, whether it's in their dream or seeing them and having vision. And if they're siblings who one of them does see, you know, that person comes to in their dream. It's interesting how they say, it's not like, you know, my sister dreamed about my mother. They say, my mother came,
Visited me. Yeah.
visited my sister, and she didn't visit me. I wonder why. And then they'll go through this guilt of why. Was I bad? Was she mad at me? And there's this, all of these other kind of stories that we create based on some of our expectation and trying to hold on so dearly.
Right.
And we create these imaginative world, and then sometimes we hurt ourselves even by that. But that's another way of just not letting go, and at least letting go.
Totally. That you're absolutely right. I have a chapter in the book which is called "Can Anyone Tell Me Why I Think That Butterfly Is My Mom?" We almost use it as the book title. And I am a perfect example of what you just described. So I was raised with religion. I loved it. I thought it was amazing. The idea of like a benevolent force that was looking out for me. And then there was a break in that sort of sense of comfort with that religion when I was in my 20s, but my mother continued to be really deeply religious. So I had this thing where like if I was worried about a test, I would ask her to pray about it because I don't believe. But of course, if you're sitting there yelling at the sky, God, I don't believe in you, then you are believing in something. Otherwise, you wouldn't be yelling at the sky. And I have found we have a curriculum that we use, my team and I use, which is called the Grief Mentor Method. It helps people create a personalized grief practice, a daily grief practice. And it has 6 core components to it. And one of them is spirituality, because we have discovered that every single person we work with who goes through profound loss ends up having to sit and wonder, what do I believe? Or what do I want to believe? And I really am the perfect example of when my mom died suddenly. I mean, and I write about this in my memoir, there are all these things that another person would have been like, well, that's a sign, like an amazing rainbow and a gorgeous sky and butterflies, which actually are not indigenous to where she lives. There were suddenly butterflies on the lawn. Like it could have been a made for TV movie of like spiritual signs. And I was like, weird, butterflies, huh? Rainbow. I was not in a space where I was ready to reconnect or believe in some sense of connection. But I am really a seeker. And I love the notion of sort of how the earth organically recycles itself. And I like the concepts of quantum physics, which is that, essentially that energy is not created or destroyed. So there is a real part of me that's like, how do we know? How do we know that, when I look at the clock and I see 11:11, that's not something in the spiritual world reminding me that I'm connected to something else? How do I know? And I have definitely had experiences and interviews and worked with mediums and people who are intuitive and walked away and been like, I don't know what that was, but I don't think it was nothing. I'm not sure what to call it, but it didn't feel random.
Yeah. Everyone, can anyone tell me essential questions about grief and loss by Meghan Riordan Jarvis? Meghan, anything, we have about a minute. Is there anything we haven't really shared that you really want our audience to know?
I just want people to really think about grief as a natural part of life that is incredibly hard, but we do all kinds of hard things. I mean, I think puberty is pretty hard, and we support kids in puberty with classes and, products and laughter and joy and care. And I think grief deserves the same. So, I don't know that we should be afraid of it. I get that we are, but I think we do it daily in small ways. And I think being conscious of that could change a culture.
Where could people find you?
If you Google my name, I have a website and I'm pretty active on Instagram. If my name is hard to remember how to spell, you can go looking for my podcast, which is called Grief is My Side Hustle, and then it'll remind you how to spell my name. But if you come and find me on Instagram, I'm on a book tour right now, so there's a bunch of activities and places that I'll be. We're always teaching classes and forming communities, teaching the Grief Mentor Method. We do that in corporations and we do it on our website. So come find us, and we really want to be able to help support you in your grief.
Thank you. How do we find your website?
So just under my name, Meghan Riordan Jarvis, if you Google, put the www beforehand, you'll find it.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for taking.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I really appreciated this conversation. It was so thoughtful.
And for all of you who are out there, create an amazing life for yourself and everyone around you. And until next week, bye-bye.
Are you a psychotherapist looking to enhance your practice? The Awareness Integration Therapy developed by Dr. Foojan Zeine is a comprehensive guide to the principle and techniques of this powerful therapeutic approach. Join the growing community who have elevated their practice and expanded their skills by embracing Awareness Integration Therapy and witnessing its life-changing impact. Order your copy on Amazon now.